Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, I am sharing 8 terrifying, true Appalachian cult encounters you were never supposed to hear. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I've walked every mile of trail in Monongahela since '09, logged bear scat like grocery lists, patched hikers who thought sneakers could outsmart shale, and shut down more than a few meth shacks choking the laurel. I know the forest's tempers, how the spruce sigh before sleet, how the ravens get mouthy when a storm stalls, how deer trails favor the same contours men do. None of that ever kept me awake for more than a night or two. What still worms into my dreams, what stains the roof of my mouth like penny blood, was a harvest I wasn't invited to. It started late October, the kind of evening that dusts frost over the switchback so it looks like powdered sugar blown off a cake. The wind ran razor-thin down Elk Run Hollow, and somewhere out there a chain clanked against a derelict gate in time with the gusts. Dispatch had logged a cluster of complaints: illegal campfire, mystery smoke, kids joyriding. Normally, that's a s'mores intervention. Still, the caller's voice, a woman, carried a tremble that wasn't about teenagers. "Blue smoke," she kept saying. Sweet-smelling. Not like wood. I parked at mile marker 23 where the old logging road slumps into a meadow none of the official maps own anymore. The radio was clean when I set out, chattering about a potential burn ban. 3 turns later, it went to static like a mouthful of bees. My flashlight made a good, honest cone through the sedge. You learn not to swing the beam around. Predators aren't the only things that chase shiny. You keep it steady, low, respectful, like a church usher guiding a latecomer to their pew. The smoke was wrong. I knew that instantly. Bluish, braided, not caught by the wind so much as guiding it. And the smell wasn't sap or meat. It was apples and iron, sweet, then pennies. Anyone who's found a gut-shot buck knows the mix. The meadow opened like a bowl, rimmed by witch hazel and chokecherry. Right in its center sat a ring of stones blackened more from ritual than from heat, the soot layered and thumb-smudged, familiar fingerprints petrified in carbon. Beyond the ring, in a neat grid, stretched an orchard no forester signed off on. Gnarled dwarf apple trees with fruit hanging low, the skins hot red like lacquered candy. I'd been through here all seasons. Those trees weren't here a summer ago. Beside the stone ring, a peculiar contraption squatted, a bellin cradle welded from farm scrap. The cradle wasn't for a baby. It was a steel sling, the size of a feed bucket braced to rock on a pivot. Etched along its rim, a spiral curled inward until my eye slipped off it, like staring at water that spins and won't let you count. And there were sacks. 3 of them, burlap, hung from an apple branch thick as my wrist. They dripped. Bled is the right word. The drops fell slow as sap, dark as pitch, forming little comets of freeze around themselves on the grass. I steadied one sack with my glove. Raccoon, another, fox. The third, a fawn, tongue grayed, eyes bound with corn husks tied into little crosses. Poaching happens. But this had the tidy cruelty of a ceremony. My brain, good at paperwork, forms, infractions, started writing the report before my mouth moved. Unpermitted fire residue, poaching evidence, anonymous orchard cultivation. Then a bell tolled, far enough away to be harmless and close enough to trip the animal part of me. One note, thin as spun glass, threaded through the branches and down into the hollow. The orchard responded. The apples shivered without wind, clinking faint against each other like polite toasts at a rich man's quiet wake. I killed my light by reflex, went down on my elbows in broom sedge and listened. Voices. Not English at first, just a vowel held and braided, a chorus on one note, the harmony shifting inside it like light underwater. There were a dozen, maybe more, and they were coming down from the timberline, stepping in single file with the balance of people trained to carry weight without clatter. I remember thinking, foolishly hopeful, church folk on some weird retreat. Then I saw clay-streaked coats, flour bags repurposed as tunics, faces cross-hatched with soot and berry purple, the lines drawn like stitches pulled too tight. The leader was a woman with her hair braided into a crown, stern as a portrait, carrying a bound ledger with oil-darkened leather. People down here keep ledgers for births, debts, garden yields. The books outlast the ones writing them. She opened hers to the wind and started to read. Not scripture. Names. Each spoke into the orchard like toll-booth tickets being punched, and after each name, the bell breathed once, thin and hungry. That's when I knew the night had slipped, leagues beyond paperwork. The first name, the Crown Braid. Woman read was Elk's Boy, and every chin dipped toward the hollow like a single body acknowledging a debt. The second was Straw Mary. The third, Widow Pike. And by then I understood the ledger wasn't keeping records. It was placing orders. I flattened deeper in the sedge and wished I'd packed more than moral outrage and a mag light. A man with shoulders like fence posts dragged a goat behind him. Its hooves skittered on stones, breath pluming. The goat saw the cradle and fought the tether, head swinging so hard the bell on its collar clanged a counterpoint to the distant one. The chorus swelled but never broke the single held vowel. They weren't drunk. They were measuring time. The oldest among them marked steps with a bowed head, and every footfall settled into the same slow cadence. 1, 2, 1, 2, as if the ground had a metronome set by something older than town clocks. The apple smell thickened until it sealed the back of my throat and hid the iron undercoat in syrup. The orchard's skin tightened around us. Even the insects observed it. No chirr, no buzz, as if the sound had been tithed. At the ring of stones they arranged themselves around the cradle. The woman opened the ledger to a fresh page. I caught glimpses of neat ruled columns, names, dates, measurements, yardage, and sigils that might have been spirals or just the way light got tricky on the ink. She pressed her palm flat to the page for a heartbeat, then raised it. When she brought her hand up, her skin bore a faint impression of the spiral, as if the ink had climbed onto her like ivy. She didn't shake it off. She seemed grateful. The goat went still. Animals know when a room changes temperature even before the thermostat does. She took a knife out, long and narrow as a reed stem, so thin it pulled no shine, and without hesitation drew it across her own palm. The cut was a slice of midnight widening, and the blood fell onto the spiral etched into the cradle's rim. It did not seep or sheet. It vanished. Drank down, straight as a well. The chorus took a step inward. The bells, yes, there were more than one now, faint and nearer, rang a reply. I realized with a pinch of panic that the bells weren't mounted anywhere. They were in throats. The goat bleated once, a query, then stilled as if the sound embarrassed it. A boy stepped forward. Late teens, eyes washed pale by moonlight or something worse, carrying an apple on a saucer. The apple had been pierced by 3 slits in a triangle, the cuts precise, puckering like stitched lips. He set it in the cradle. The woman pressed her bleeding palm to the apple until the skin sucked flat against her hand. When she lifted away, the apple showed no juice, no bruise. Instead, the triangle had become a spiral, tight and inescapable, borrowing the curve of her cut as if to learn her. The burlap sacks swayed as if in a draft. The fawn's hooves knocked softly inside like knuckles on a door. The goat's rope barely twitched. I caught myself calculating distances, tree to ring to road, road to truck, and hated that my first thought involved retreat. But a ranger doesn't stand up in front of a dozen keyed-up cultists and announce the law like the sheriff at the end of a fairy tale. You learn the wind. You pick your moment. A second file of figures slipped from the timber, slower, burdened. They carried nothing at first, empty hands held as if cradling air, until the air revealed itself. Jars. Glass mason jars, each with a single red apple slice suspended in cloudy liquid. The moon wrote its crooked signature across those jars and found things swimming that weren't bubbles. Threads? Scar tissue? The jars sang when the wind passed, a whispering chord that grew louder as they approached the ring. Ledger holds, the woman said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been saying the same 2 words for 100 years. Harvest pays. I should have used the radio again. Test it, even if static. But the words felt like they'd snag in my throat the way gnats do when you jog with your mouth open. I crawled along the sedge until I had a clean sightline of the trail back out. Past the ring, past the goat, I could make the line if the group broke focus. I counted the faces I could see. 20, 30, all marked with the stitch pattern. Charcoaled cheeks cross-hatched, berry purple pulled across the bridge of the nose like a child's crayon job turned deliberate. Not a bare face among them. The woman closed the ledger with a soft glove of sound. All heads lifted. Every eye found where I lie. I've had bears look through me, cougars who were ideas more than flesh. Meth cooks decide I was worth the risk. None of that equals the experience of 50 pupils dialing down onto your exact position in a dark meadow. Not because of hunger, not because of fear. Because you were a number they hadn't accounted for and now accounted for exactly. "We've won unmarked," she said, eyes on the sedge, on me. It did not come out like a threat. It came out like a correction. The bell rang again, once, pure, and the orchard shivered a polite answer with all its little red tongues. I stood up. I rose with hands open and my flashlight angled down, quick to show I wasn't there to blind or swing. A dozen faces adjusted to my height like leveling tools. The woman's attention marked me like a thumb on a bruised peach. Gentle, testing, certain of the tender spot underneath. "Evening," I said, because manners live where training fails. "You're on federal land. We've had reports." The boy with the saucer stared with such nakedness I felt indecent. The goat nosed my pant leg, the bell around its neck ticking soft, too soft for the size of the metal. The woman lifted her cut palm and, without looking away from me, tipped it so 2 fat drops of blood tapped the spiral-dressed apple. They vanished as before. "Reports," she echoed like she was tasting the word for worms. "Ledger holds. Harvest pays. You'll need to," I began, but what I intended to say, "disperse," hit a slope inside the night and slid away. The jar's whisper rose to a thin keen. The cradle rocked once on its pivot. Spiral to spiral, breath to breath. I took a step backward, more for space than surrender. The meadow's grade changed under my boot like it had been waiting for my weight to tell it which way to lean. The trail I'd mapped in my mind retreated a hand's span. The old fire road lost 10 feet of its gray spine in the dark. The forest had shifted its furniture. "Unmarked," the woman repeated, almost kindly. She turned the ledger so the page faced me. I saw my name, printed where there had been blank seconds ago. The letters weren't ink. They were absence. My name cut out of the paper, the hollow of me crisp and white. "You walked without being counted," she said. "The hollow keeps accounts even when the Park Service misplaces." "I'm not yours," I said. It came out like a promise made to a mirror. She inclined her head. "Everything that breathes here is ours while it breathes here. We don't hold what's not paid for, and we don't pay for what we can't keep." She nodded to 2 men who flanked me so quiet I didn't hear grass complain. "We need 1 apple a palm. A bell. Take the goat," I said. The moment I spoke, I knew the violation in it. I'd offered a life that wasn't mine like spare change. The goat jerked its head and looked at me with sudden, clear offense. "We tithe wild, not owned," the woman said. "The ledger is not a ledger of theft." The boy with the saucer stepped nearer. Up close, his spiral-cut apple smelled like hot sugar and something lower, cellar cool. "Just a touch," he whispered. "Just to mark you on the page so you don't get misplaced." He looked like a kid asking you to sign his cast. I did what training and fear and pride told me not to do. I ran. The sedge parted. Brambles stitched at my calves. The orchard leaned, polite, to let me through, then leaned back to close the gap. Behind me, a single bell note traveled with a calm that unstrung my knees. I'd love to tell you I crashed heroically through the brush and outpaced them with ranger grit. In truth, the hollow decided whether I was allowed to leave, and that night it decided to make me earn the permission. Paths re-angled. Familiar stumps lifted themselves a foot to the left. The moon walked behind a branch and came out with a different face on. The old fire road finally flashed its gray bones ahead, and as my boots hit gravel, my radio spat to life. "Ranger Culver? Culver, copy?" I pressed transmit so hard the plastic creaked. "Copy," I said, voice borrowed from someone older and shaking. I didn't look back. Some instincts you obey the way you respect electricity. At the truck, the dashboard lights steadied into their clean little constellations. I drove without headlights for a quarter-mile because it felt like the beams could stir what the night, mercifully, had decided to let lie. When I reached the paved road, I pulled over, put my forehead on the steering wheel, and let my body go through the motions, breathing, swearing, counting fingers, while my mind sat in a cold meadow listening to a cradle drink blood like water. Back at the station, I filed what could be filed: illegal gathering, poaching evidence, unpermitted cultivation, unknown religious ceremony. I wrote it clean. I put it in the lockbox. A week later, the report was gone. The lock wasn't broken. The box wasn't jimmied. The clerk shrugged the way people shrug when the ledger explains something to them they can't repeat. I went back 2 days after that with a state warden and a county deputy who liked to talk big about breaking up deerjackers. The meadow was a bowl of frost holding its breath. No ring, no cradle, no jars, no orchard. The ground wore a seam like a healed incision where the trees had been, but you had to squint to see it. The deputy laughed, then got quieter the longer he looked. The warden kicked at the grass and said he wasn't, writing me up for wasting his Wednesday because he didn't like the way the wind sounded when it pushed through that place. Christmas. That year, a package arrived at the station with no return address. Inside, a single perfect apple cupped in brown paper. No bruise, no wax, no sticker. I didn't eat it. I took it home and buried it under my maple. In the spring, the maple budded a week early and held its leaves a week late. I can't prove the apple had a say in that, but I talk to the tree when I water it, the way you talk to old dogs who know your sins. The apples came the next Christmas, too, and the next. Always just one. Always perfect. I bury them. I leave my palm uncut. When night rides the hollow like a bridle, I sit up in bed, tasting iron under honey, and tell myself my name out loud until sleep takes me. If there's a ledger with me in it, I hope the line beside my name reads "Returned." If it doesn't, I know they'll show up again with a bell and a cradle and a boy holding an apple, asking me to be accounted for. And I know, deep as tree rings, that the hollow always gets its harvest, early, late, or from the men who thought paperwork could out-talk a page that writes itself. I've driven every switchback between Hindman and Hazard with a cooler full of insulin tipsy on the passenger floor and a stethoscope warm from the sun on my dash. My patients are coal widows who measure years in casseroles, men who lost fingers to augers, and kids with coughs old as their granddaddy's pickaxes. Folks let me in because I'm quiet and because I keep my judgments in the glove box with the expired county maps. Most days, the worst thing I see is neglect that learned to wear its Sunday clothes. But there's a symbol I started to dread so hard it soured my coffee. A single strand of red thread knotted around a porch rail. Down here, thread can mean protection, grannies. Knot it over newborn cribs and say a verse. Or it can mean what got tangled stays tangled till the good Lord combs it. The thread I'm talking about didn't look like prayer. It looked like ownership. It showed up on houses where bills arrived with no logos, where empty jars lined the sill like soldiers, where laughter sounded careful, like it had to fit inside a measuring cup. Dispatch sent me out on a gray March morning when the hills wore a bruise of fog and crows walked the ditches like undertakers between gigs. Non-responsive to calls, the note read. Patient, P. Harbin. Type 2, poorly controlled. Neighbor says he ain't been to town. I knew the name. He kept his bottles lined by height and saved rubber bands on the fridge handle. He'd lost his wife last spring and treated the empty house like a ship he was captaining alone through weather he couldn't predict. Harbin's lane was rutted in 2 deep grooves that caught my tires like rails. His mailbox hung open. Inside, past-due envelopes wore the same wax seal on their flaps, a spool stamped in red. That gave me an iced feeling under my breastbone. As I pulled up, I saw it, what I'd hoped I wouldn't. Red thread wound round each porch post in tight, even loops from base to cap. No frays, no danglers, not an inch of slop. Whoever wrapped that thread had time, rules, and hands that believed in knots. I hollered before I stepped inside. No answer. The front room smelled like Murphy oil soap strangled a sourer smell, metallic, like a penny in the mouth. Harbin's living room was unkindly neat. No shoes by the mat, no newspapers out of order, no photographs, not even dust dancing in the window shaft. What he did have were jars. Dozens, maybe more. Each mason jar sat on a coaster cut from old hymnals. Each held cloudy water and a length of red thread coiled inside like a vein curled to nap. The jars weren't sealed. They had square cloths tied with string like chicken broth cooling. When the draft from my entry touched them, the threads shivered. I found him at the kitchen table. Hands clenched, fingers swollen purple-blue beyond his knuckles. Red thread bit into each wrist where it had been tied tight to the chair rails and then wrapped back on itself in figure eights. His eyes were open and glossy. He wasn't hypoglycemic out. He was awake enough to register me and ashamed enough to wince. On the table sat his meter, untouched since last night by the logbook's say-so, and a saucer with 3 sugar cubes spaced like a traffic sign. "Mr. Harbin," I said, keeping my voice low the way you talk to spooked horses, "I'm going to cut these, sir, and get you a gel." "You're dipping low." "Don't cut," he breathed, voice paper-thin. His tongue worked like it had lint on it. "Please, Ms." He never got my last name right, and I never minded. "They're coming to measure." "Don't add." "Add what?" "Length," he said, as if that explained the world. "We keep even. They keep us even. If I eat, I owe. If you cut, I owe what you cut." Tears made his eyes look oiled. "Don't make me long, honey. I can't pay long. My training told my hands to move and my head to chart and my mouth to reassure. But the red thread on his wrist looked mean in a way I associate with good intentions weaponized. I checked his glucose, dangerous low and diving. I grabbed my kit. He flinched when the zipper whispered. Outside on the gravel, a set of tires buried deep, slow, and certain. 4 doors opened without haste. Footsteps came up the porch boards in 3 beats. Step, pause, hush. I smelled cloves and mothballs and something tinny, like a penny licked clean. The kitchen window wore a decal of a rooster with a broken tail. Through it, I saw 4 people crossing Harbin's threshold without knocking. Each wore a thimble on the right thumb, and a leather needle case hung at the breastbone like a saint's medal. The oldest, a woman with a white scar plowing through her left eyebrow, let her gaze wash over the jars and then settle on me. In her left hand she carried a ledger bound in cracked red, same shade as the thread. The cover had no title. It didn't need one. "Mr. Harbin," she said, and her voice had the softness of velvet backed with sandpaper. "Time to balance now. We brought our lengths, and we brought our witness. Oh," she added, looking at me like a seamstress appraising spare cloth. "And he's added a visitor. Visitors stretch things." I planted my feet, slid a glucose gel from the kit, and tucked it into Harbin's palm. "He's my patient," I said. "He's not a bolt of fabric." "Everything's fabric," she said, and smiled like she'd nicer broom straw than me. That's how it started, with a house wrapped like a spool, a man tied to his own chair with what he called fairness, and a society that measured mercy in inches. Up close, their thimbles weren't novelty store tin. They were old, heavy, dimpled, the kind you inherit with needles that bite true. Their clothes weren't costumes either, just Sunday service neat, hems straight, collars pressed. The eyebrow scar woman, later I'd learned some called her Madam Gage, set the ledger on the table without asking. A younger man with hair clipped to the nape of his head began counting the jars aloud under his breath, his thumb tapping each circle of hymn paper as if it were a metronome. I squeezed the gel into Harbin's cheek. He grimaced. "Please," he whispered. "You're making me longer." "What you're making," I murmured back, "is blood sugar." I slid my trauma shears from my belt, their blunt noses catching the light that didn't come from the open shades. The old woman's eyes clicked to the chrome like a dog's to a squirrel. "Don't cut," she repeated without heat, like a teacher reminding a child which drawer holds the crayons. We're within a quarter-inch of balance as of the last measure. He pledged inches to pay for life that wasn't owed him. She laid her palm on the ledger as if to warm it. County 12, Saturday last, when that coal truck jackknifed and kissed his grill, he should have been folded like a handkerchief. We trimmed him, and he walked out whole, inches for inches. If you feed him or free him out of turn, you set him in arrears. Arrears have their own prices. The ledger's columns were neat and ruled. My eyes fell into them like ruts, names down the left margin, and to the right a soldierly procession of dates, knot counts, and inch-tall notations. 1-8, 1-4, 1-2, 1. A third column read paid, another read owed, and the last was titled with a symbol that could have been a spool or a zero with a slit for thread. By P. Harbin, someone had written, Plus au 124, accident averted, County 12, and 1-8 meals missed, 1-8 heat spared, then now hoik even. A fresh, blank line waited hungry. The younger man finished his jar count with a satisfied hum. 24 souls worth, he announced. Souls? I snapped before I could stop my mouth. Those are inches of string in watered tap. They hold promises, Madam Gage said. Promises weigh the same whether you pack them into water or lungs. We keep them wet so they don't tangle. She glanced at Harbin. Don't they? He nodded, little. Shame ran over his face like a wash. They saved me, nurse, he said, voice wobbling. Not doctors, them I owed. Then my boy called from Pike and I told him I'd send something. That's when I fell behind. Words add length. That's the worst of it. You say, I promise, you lengthen. I say, I won't forget, I lengthen. They measured me generous. I'm the one unraveled. The third visitor, a woman my age with hands roughened by honest work, took off her thimble and rolled it between her palms. We aren't cruel, she said, a twinge of apology under her tone. We keep folks inside their cut. To be always too long is to get snagged. To be always too short is to rend. We keep even. Even is a kindness. Then why is he tied? I asked. So he doesn't take what he can't pay back by accident. Madam Gage's chin flicked toward the sugar cubes. Or by pity. And her eyes grazed me. Something in me, trained by triage and by men who cry only when they're about to die, stood tall. His pancreas and his brain don't consult your columns. If he bottoms out, he dies. He needs food now. Then the measure will take it back somewhere else, she said, not unkindly. But not here, not today, and not from the ledger we keep. There are other ledgers. You know this. She produced a long needle from her case, longer than anything used to quilt, closer to a bodkin but finer. The metal didn't shine. It drank light. She stabbed it into the table between my splayed fingers with a tidy tap. No threat, just punctuation. The wood took it whole. My knuckles jumped. Covenant of measures, she said. We pledged him square. We announced it to the neighbors and the night, and they answered with their own lengths pledged. If you cut him, you cut our covenant and we'll have to sow elsewhere to keep even. Elsewhere isn't yours to choose. The jars on the counter began to hum. Not loud, not theatrical. A glass tremolo, like a hand running softly around the rims. Inside, the red threads uncurled, not because of heat, but like snakes waking for spring. They brushed the inner glass once and left faint red splotches as if they were bleeding dye. In my peripheral vision, a pickup eased alongside my car. Another group disembarked, 3 more, all with thimbles, and took up positions on the porch as if measuring the house with their eyes, peak to eave, post to post, shadow to sill. The youngest among them, a boy with a front tooth chipped to a crescent, hung a fresh loop of red at the stair bottom, a little tail knotted into a neat confidence. I forced a breath past the copper taste rising. I had a patient in hypoglycemic freefall and a cult that believed mercy could be tallied in quarter inches. I reached for my shears. The younger man shook his head, once regretful. You'll owe it, he said. You take a length without logging, it finds you. It always finds the taker. Then I'll pay, I said, and didn't know I meant it until the words were hanging. Words add length, Harbin moaned, as if I'd thrown him a chain. Let him, I said, and slid the shears under the thread biting his right wrist. The metal kissed it. The hum from the jars sharpened like 1,000 mosquitoes aligned their pitch. I snipped. The house breathed in. The threads inside the jars uncoiled to their full, red, wet-looking lengths and slapped the glass once, twice, like fishtails. The front door eased wider on no wind. Somewhere in the yard, the mailbox flag rose on its own and hovered at attention. The needle in the table thrummed and made a noise no metal should make, like a note sung into a bottle that you're standing inside. "Debt taken," Madam Gage said, but not angrily, more like a clerk stamping "received." She drew a finger down the ledger and wrote, without ink I could see, my name. The letters dried darker than I was ready to see. "We'll measure you, nurse." "I'm not your bolt," I said. "Everyone's somebody's bolt," she said gently. "We just admit it." Everything after the cut moved in clean, sure motions like a practice surgery. The red thread around Harbin's right wrist slithered off with a hiss of released tension and shrank on the floor as if it were drying in fast air. I squeezed a second gel into his cheek, then broke a sugar cube and tucked it under his tongue, daring the ledger to mark me again. Color seeped back into his lips by watercolor stages. He blinked twice, the way people do when their brain reconnects to its hands and decides to hold. The jars didn't explode. Hollywood would have asked for shrapnel, but they did fail in quick, little pops that sounded like knuckles cracking. In a church where everyone's trying not to notice. Cloth caps leapt, strings whipped, and the water crawled out in viscous threads that should have wet the counter and didn't. Instead, the red strings inside uncoiled and slid down the cabinet faces like worms in rain, pooling at the baseboards, then seeking. That's the word I use when I tell it. The strings sought. They found my boots and climbed, snugging around my ankles with the heat of water just pulled off a stove. They pulled with curiosity, not malice, a cat testing your sleeve. Madam Gage didn't flinch. She looked almost proud, like a teacher watching a well-rehearsed recital. "The cut has a course," she announced for the room, not for me. "We'll trim elsewhere." "Witness." "Witness," the others echoed, and some made a quick cross over their hearts with their thimbled thumbs. "I'm taking him in," I said, hooking my arms under Harbin's and levering him up. He cried out when the thread bit his left wrist. I slid the shears in and snipped that one, too. The humming in the jars pitched up to a knife's edge. The water on the floor climbed higher on my boots, little red ropes lacing my calves in X's like old-timey stockings. I should have panicked. Instead, all I registered was temperature. Warmth that wasn't blood heat, and the smell. Cloves, iron, the faint sweetness of laundry hung to dry on a cold day. One of the porchmen stepped into the doorway, blocking it with his shoulders square. The boy with the chipped tooth looked eager to prove something. Madam Gage gave them one small shake of the head. "No," she said. "We don't pull what runs. We measure what returns. To me," she added, "you can leave. But measure weights." I half-carried Harbin through the hall, boots smearing red-skinned strings that retracted from daylight like worms from salt. On the porch, air returned with a slap, the kind of mountain gust that makes flags stand and points hats north. The red loops on the posts fluttered and stilled. When I eased him down the steps, the bottom loop, freshly tied, snapped free and curled around my right boot like a snake that had decided on a branch. The society followed us only as far as the threshold, their faces bright as if lit from the ledger's pages. The needle in the kitchen table thrummed once, a benediction or a promise I couldn't say. I strapped Harbin into my passenger seat, tossed the cooler onto the floor, and turned the key. The engine thought about it, then agreed. As I pulled down the lane, the pickup fell in behind me, not crowding, just keeping our taillights honest. We took the turn slow. Harbin's head lolled and then steadied. "You shouldn't have," he murmured, guilt making his voice smaller than a boy's. "They were so close to even. You made me long." "I'll take the inches," I said before my mind could vote down my mouth. "Make a quilt out of 'em when this is done." "You can't sow what you can't measure," he said sadly. "They'll measure you. They measure me my whole life. Just didn't know it till now." We rolled into the clinic's gravel, stones popping the way popcorn lies about being done. I hustled him inside. The porch felt too crowded with pieces of thread clinging to my laces like burrs. The on-call doc didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. We stabilized him. Dextrose drip, labs, the steady work of disobedient chemistry brought to heel. The society idled in the parking lot for 20 minutes and then left without music, without a spectacle, without proof they'd been there, except 3 tight little red loops tied to the clinic's handrail at exact distances. Like rungs on a ladder, Harbin lasted a month. He signed himself out early because shame will do what disease can't. He returned to his house, took his chair, and, as far as anyone could tell, kept even. His obituary listed no immediate family. It asked that memorials be made to Society of Measure and provided no address, just a red stamp of a spool where the P.O. box should have lived. The night after he died, a length of red thread appeared on my bottom porch step, knotted at one end and frayed at the other, the way a life looks when you hold it up to the light. No note, no footprint, just that. I picked it up and felt the warm on the stove heat again, harmless and warning at once. I keep it in my glove compartment coiled in a sandwich bag like a heart kept small on purpose. Since then, I see their marks everywhere once you know how to read them. A loop on a mailbox flag that means the household's squared a debt. A triple knot on a fence post that means a promise is overdue. 3 tiny X's carved beneath a church window where a quilting circle meets late and sings low. I pass houses where laughter sounds measured. 3 seconds on, 3 seconds off, like someone taught joy to keep its length. Do I regret cutting? Every day, in the way nurses catalog their mistakes beneath their ribs and count them at red lights. Would I do it again? Yes, because blood sugar is a truer god than any ledger a human writes. But I learned to keep cash in my pocket and my mouth shut about promises. Words add length, and the society is patient. They've started measuring me in small ways. My coffee goes cold at the exact same line in the mug no matter how quick I drink. My shoelaces fray only in even increments. When I sew a missing button on my scrub top, the thread never tangles. But each stitch lands the same distance from the next without me trying. Like someone invisible is pinching fabric ahead of my needle and humming. If you drive these hills and spot a porch wrapped neat in red, don't knock unless you're prepared to be counted. If you find a bit of thread tied to your mirror or your mailbox, don't brag about luck. Luck can be trimmed. Keep your promises small and your debts in cash. And if anyone ever asks you to breathe into a jar to pay what you owe, remember, breath is the last tender. Spend it where it counts, not where ledgers chase inches and call it mercy. I've put out barn fires where the tin roof fell in like a bad grin, chased smoke through meth shacks that pop like cheap fireworks, and cut a family out of a pickup with the jaws while rain came sideways off Beach Mountain. I don't scare easy. Fire teaches you what to respect and what to ignore. The thing that still makes me whisper my own name when I wake, just to make sure it's still there, wasn't flame at all. It was a chapel. Old stone, no congregation, a bell rope that hangs like a vein, and on a November evening we got sent there for smoke unknown source. Dispatch pinged our volunteer house just after dusk. Air cold enough to bite the bridge of your nose. Caller reports smoke in clearing near Old Beach Logging Road. Structure present. Deke, our rookie, still shiny with enthusiasm and the kind of optimism that makes old-timers sigh, asked if we were taking the pumper or just brush gear. Brush, I said. If it's a structure, it's a little one. We bounced up a road that forgot it used to be a road. Frost turned the ruts into bone. Through the black ribs of trees, I glimpsed a thin breath of smoke. Wrong color. Wood smoke goes from clear to white to brown when someone burns trash. This was a pale gray that looked colder than the air, like breath on glass. When we broke into the clearing, the chapel sat there like a tooth in the jaw of the hills. One-room stone, narrow slit windows, a door of weather-silver boards, and a bell rope sagging from a little cupola. No church sign, no parking lot, just frost-brittle grass and a stack of stones nobody had bothered to make a wall out of. See flame? I asked, scanning eaves, roofline, foundation. Nothing. The smoke seemed to exhale from inside, then swallow itself back. That's not how smoke works. Deke shrugged deeper into his coat. Place looks like it eats light. We went to the door. No lock, just a latch polished by hands 100 years dead. I lifted it. The smell inside wasn't fire. It was beeswax candles, paper gone to dust, old hymnals that hold on to breath like it belongs to them. The smoke we'd seen was a sort of fog, hugging the stone the way fog hugs a creek in October. In shallow alcoves along the walls, places where saints might have stood if anyone in this part of Carolina had carved them, candles guttered in blue stubs, and beneath each candle sat a wooden plaque. Not fancy, just first names carved with a pocket knife steady enough to make the letters neat. Under each plaque was a little hollow, like a thumb bowl full of ash. Creepy, Deke said, because rookies narrate, and it's better than hearing your pulse. Check for heat signatures, I said. But even before he lifted the tick, I knew we didn't have fire. The air had the stillness that follows a prayer you weren't invited to. A woman stood near the chancel rail that wasn't a rail, just a timber laid across 2 stones. Denim jacket, hair braided like she meant to work in it. She didn't startle when we came in, just folded her hands the way you do when you finished something and want to see what it did. "Evenin'," she said. "You came when the keeper's busy." "Ma'am, we had reports of smoke," I said, defaulting to plain speech with the edges sanded. "We're here to make sure your meeting place is safe." She looked past me, past Deke, up toward the rope. "We keep it safe." Behind her, something moved on the app's wall. Not her shadow. Taller, wrong-angled. I've seen heat mirage bend shapes, and I've seen smoke make saints out of plywood. This was neither. The shadow paced once across the stone and stopped when it knew I saw it. Deke drifted to the nearest plaque. Jonah, it said, the J carved with extra care. He touched the lip of the ash hollow with a glove and drew his finger back. The ash held the shape he'd made. A spiral like you'd trace when you're bored, only it looked deliberate, nested tight, the kind that makes your eye lose where it began. "Huh," he said, because rookies always think they're safe in daylight words. The woman's gaze didn't touch him. "The rope," she said, nodding toward the bell. "Pull once for mercy, twice for memory." "We don't pull anything," I said. "We just—" Deke grinned, the kind of grin you see on boys who like to know where the fence is by pushing it. "What happens if you don't pull?" "You stay as you are," she said. "Most folks pull sooner or later." Deke reached and wrapped his hand around the rope. It was softer than rope should be, like it had been held by too many hands and learned to be polite. "Deke," I said. "Don't." He tugged. Once. Then, because boys test rules the way fire tests rafters, he tugged again. The bell tolled twice, notes too clean for a bell that old, and the chapel breathed. I felt it. The air pulled toward the altar, then back, colder. Deke swayed, and his grin collapsed into a look I've only seen once before, on a man who realized the floor he was on wasn't a floor. I can't remember my granddad's face," he said. "It's just blank." The shadow stepped away from the wall. That's the moment I knew we weren't clearing smoke. We were trespassing on an accounting. Training kept my feet from shifting even when my guts wanted me to back toward the door. When something you can't name stands up where a wall should be, you don't run unless you're sure the doorway is still where you left it. My eyes tracked the shadow, same height as Deke, same forward slump he got when he was proud of a joke he hadn't told yet. But it moved like film run a tick too slow, like the seconds stuttered around it so the world had to cough to catch up. "Back to me," I said, the way you say it on a road shoulder with traffic sucking your coat. Deke didn't move. The woman dipped 2 fingers in a bowl of ash and marked his forehead with a careful cross. The ash stayed. Not a smear, not performative. Like Gray had chosen his skin. "Return what you took," she told me, as if this was as simple as handing a borrowed wrench back. "What did we take?" I asked, though the answer lay heavy as a spare SCBA on my shoulders. She touched the nearest plaque. "We keep what we can of folks who come here. Names, the way the letters sit in the mouth, the weight of the years on them. Memory's messy. Mercy makes it tidy if you ask right. She nodded toward the rope. He asked twice. Once for mercy, twice for memory, Deke repeated like his mouth remembered classroom rules his head had misplaced. Twice removes, the woman said, not unkind. Takes the picture out of the frame and leaves the frame. Some folks can't bear the picture. Some shouldn't have. She flipped a blank plaque upright on the shelf and took a pocket knife from her jacket. The blade was simple and fellow-traveled, the kind of knife you cut baling twine with. She carved D-E-K-E with patience and pride. I hated the respectful way she did it, like this was a christening. Beneath the name, she pressed a finger into the ash and drew the spiral again. Careful and small. We'll hold what falls off him, she said. Won't leave it to run loose in these hills. The shadow turned its head toward the sound of my breath. No face, not a flat nothing. An impression, like the way a pillow remembers a face that just left it. Cheek hollow, mouth suggested, eyes a trick of depth. I've seen men without faces after explosions. This wasn't that. This was the idea of a face waiting for a name to put weight on it. The rope, I said, and I could hear how my voice wanted to fray. Once, the woman said. If you've got mercy to give. If you don't, the chapel won't pretend. You've been doing this long? I asked as if a friendly tone might make the geometry relax. Long enough to know that forgetting is a kind of fire, she said. It clears, it sterilizes, and it leaves ground that looks safe until the first hard rain takes the hill. I went to the rope. Up close, the exposed hemp looked laced with hair and something white like salt. My palm itched to wrap it. Deke stood too still, like his joints had realized they were hinges. His lips moved without sound. Later, he told me he was saying "Granddad" over and over, trying to repack air with a face. Just once, the woman reminded me, and I realized she wasn't guarding a rule. She was keeping me from making it worse. I pulled. The bell note went through me like the first knock on a locked door you know you have to open. The chapel inhaled warm, held, exhaled sweet the way honeysuckle does in June when the air goes gold. My own name rose up my throat like something trying to get home. I grabbed it with my teeth and held hard. Deke blinked and took a single ragged breath. The shadow shivered, thinned, and backed toward the wall like fog reluctantly agreeing to be a wall again. Better, the woman said. She set the plaque, with Deke's name and the little gray spiral, right of center on the shelf. Left felt like a road you don't want to walk. Everything we burn has to have somewhere to land. What are the spirals? I asked, still too aware of my tongue in my mouth, the weight of words. Memory's path, she answered. In or out. We don't point. We just mark where folks walked so they don't get lost in their own heads. Deke rubbed his forehead and stared at his glove like a man unsure what a hand is for. I can see him again, he said, and a sound hopped out of him, a single bark of grief that made my ribs go soft. He had a hat with a turkey feather. I forgot his laugh. I forgot. Mercy gives back what it can, the woman told him. Not always everything. That's why we keep the leftovers. What happens if you pull 3? I asked because part of me still believed in rules that reveal secrets if you add. Part of me wanted to know the edge so I could tell my people not to lean on it. Nobody pulls 3, she said, and her mouth did something that wasn't a smile. That's not a bell anymore. That's a lock. We swept the walls with the tick out of habit. Patches of warm air pooled in the alcoves. The rest read cold as the rock that birthed the room. The smoke that had called us had thinned to a thought. If I'd been a wise man, I'd have thanked her and left. County'll chain this, I said, because I believed in paperwork then. It's not safe. Safety's a scale, she said. We're not the ones who built it. We just stop it from tipping onto folks who can't lift the other end. A gust found the bell and rocked the note down into the stone. The floor hummed. Deke flinched like the chapel had remembered his name and set it behind his back. I set a hand between his shoulder blades the way you steady someone looking into a canyon. We're going, I said, and meant it. On the way out, I paused at a plaque near the door. Jonah, again. Someone had wiped the spiral clean. The ash lay smooth as paper. Who was he? A boy who thought names are only what you answer to, she said. He learned better. We all do. Outside, the frost took my boot prints and arranged them a little wrong, like a child who does chores almost right so you'll notice. We stepped into the cold that knew nothing about ropes and spirals and bells, and I let myself believe for a breath that everything inside would stay inside. I was wrong. Word travels in the high country the way fire takes pine straw. Quick, sideways, and smoking at the edges even when you think it's out. I filed the call. Unfounded smoke, candles present, no open flame, public nuisance potential. I wrote it clean, left out how the rope had put a taste in my mouth like copper warmed by a hand. A week later, the county chained the chapel door and hammered a sign. Condemned. Unsafe structure. No entry. People took pictures. Then hikers kept calling us anyway. Weird bell, names carved, can't find my way out. We'd get there and the chain would hang on the latch exactly as the county left it. Only the air inside the clearing would have that used prayer feeling again. Deke quit the department the next month. Not in anger. Not even in fear. He just got small around edges that used to be big in him. He started carrying a little notebook in his chest pocket. Spiral-bound, cheap, blue lines crowded with names he wrote every morning and checked every night. Mom. Dad, Granddad, Turkey Feather Hat, Mrs. Copley, who taught him Amazing Grace, Coach Riley, Dog. Boone. The ink faded by evening, he said. Not rubbed. Faded like it had been sitting in sun, it didn't. He traced over it daily. If I stop, I think the letters will stop being letters, he told me, and he wasn't wrong in a way I had language for. We caught another call near beach. Man wandering the timberline, saying he left something inside, can't remember what. I found him kneeling at the plaque alcoves with the chain intact and the door still closed. He had both hands flat on the stone, face warm with tears that didn't know where to go. "What'd you lose?" I asked gently, and he looked at me as if I'd asked him to list the shapes of clouds. "A word," he said. "Just one. The one that makes my wife look up when I walk in. You learn to hate helplessness in yourself. You learn it early in this work. I wanted to pull twice for him and hand him a picture whole. I didn't. I wasn't invited. We went back as a crew, off duty, because men like to pretend that if you understand the machine, you don't have to respect the blade." The chain clinked against the wood while we stood with our hands in our coat pockets like schoolboys. The bell rope inside hung still. The denim woman wasn't there, but the plaques were, candles guttering with that barely blue flame that argues with drafts and winds. We told ourselves we were checking on a potential hazard. We were covering a hole in our maps. The climax came on a night when fog lay low like milk and the county scanner lit with a kid's voice. Daddy won't answer me. He can't say his name. We ran. 2 rigs, lights low because fog gives lights fangs. Found them not at a house but in the chapel clearing. Chain on the door, father slumped against the sill, daughter pounding his chest with flat hands that had learned CPR on YouTube. He breathed. He spoke. He said, "I," and "you," and "help," and "cold." He could not say, "Evan." It fell out of his mouth like a tooth and landed without sound. "Who pulled?" I asked the girl. She shook her head hard enough to hurt herself. "No one," she said. He heard a bell. He said it made his teeth itch. He walked here like something was hooking him. The fog pressed its big thumb on us. Deke stood over the man and tried a trick he'd been practicing. "Say it after me," he coached like a kindergarten teacher. "A," the man followed. "Van," the man mouthed with effort. "Together. Evan." The sound scattered like birds startle. The man tasted air and came away empty. His eyes begged us to fix a thing we had no wrench for. I made a call I'd mocked in my head. I grabbed the chain, heaved the hasp off. Years of humidity taught me where to kick, and stepped into the chapel. The air had warmed like breath inside a scarf. I went straight to the rope. Once, I told Deke without looking, and pulled. The bell hit like a defibrillator in a church. Warmth exhaled. The candles tipped their little heads and straightened. Outside, the girl made a sound that had her father's name wrapped in it whole. He said, Evan, like a man who'd found his spare key in the pocket he never checks first. Behind me, the denim woman spoke from a place I hadn't seen her stand. "Good," she said. "Mercy before memory if you can manage it." I turned. The shadow on the apse wall knew me now. It didn't step away. It swayed in a slow, patient rhythm, like it was humming a hymn no one had taught it. "What is the keeper?" I asked, because questions are brave in mouths that have never seen answers fall apart. "The part of a name that isn't letters," she said, the way a voice leans on it. "We store what falls off people when they're too tired to carry all their own self." She touched a plaque near the center. "We're not thieves. We don't take more than a bell asks for." "What if a man pulls twice because he doesn't know better?" I asked, very aware of Deke's notebook like a bird in his pocket. "Then he learns," she said. "Or someone pulls mercy for him and takes a little of the corner off themselves to square him. That's why the world isn't a drawer full of uneven forks." "I'll say it," Deke murmured behind me, and when I looked he wasn't talking about Evan. He held the rope, white around the knuckles. "Once," I warned. "Once," he agreed, and tugged the smallest pull I've ever seen count as a pull. The bell clapped its clean hand against the air. Deke sucked in his cheeks and laughed once, a broken sound that mended as it left him. "Turkey feather hat," he said like prayer. "Got it. We chained the door back, we wrote the call up the way you cook books to keep them edible, and we went home. I changed after that. Not in the way ghost stories brag about. I still clear chimneys and flip breakers and tell teenagers that a mattress makes smoke like tires. But when I dream of fire now, it isn't heat that wakes me. It's erasure. Whole rooms in my head go gray and still. I wake whispering my name, my wife's, my son's, the dog's, the town, the road to the lake, the volunteer house's phone tree, and the password to the radio because that's how you count yourself in after you've walked through a place that eats names and calls it tidy. County keeps the chain on. People still go. They come out saying they were thinking of someone and now they can't stop thinking of someone else. Or that they can't say a name without tasting honey. Or that their father's nickname has gone missing, but he laughs the same. Sometimes, if it's a fog night and you stand just outside the clearing, you'll hear a bell like a single raindrop on tin. If you do, don't pull twice. Don't be brave in the way boys are brave. If you've got mercy to spare, pull once and speak the names you want to keep on the walk back to your truck. And if you forget which road takes you home, try your own first. Say it out loud until it opens. I've run I-81 so long I can smell the mile markers. Diesel and hay near Bull's Gap. Wet iron where the Clinch River breathes across the blacktop. Hot brake pads on Fancy Gap like a choir of angry cicadas. I'm not new to highway hauntings. Phantom headlights that turn out to be reflections. Way stations that appear open then close like you imagine the lights. CB chatter from a voice you swear belonged to a driver who's 10 years dead. Those things you chalk up to fatigue and coffee brood vicious. But there's a spur road near Bristol I never believed in, until the night it believed in me. Folks call it Mercy's Mile. It's not on GPS. It shows up for the indebted the way thunder shows up for heat. That fall, my debts were stacked like pallets. My brother's medical bills, dialysis 3 times a week, the machine thrumming like a distant generator, a divorce that was civil in front of the judge and mean in the parking lot, and the little debts you pretend are small. Dear. I didn't stop for when the eyes went coin-bright in the ditch, a neighbor's request I dodged with a next weekend, the unpaid promise to be there when Dad's heart took the off-ramp. I kept driving like you can outrun a ledger that uses breath for ink. It was past midnight, rain steady as metronome clicks, wipers keeping time that made my eyelids heavy. Somewhere north of the state line sign where Tennessee shakes hands with Virginia, a road sign blinked to life like it had just remembered its job. White letters on matte black, clean as a church bulletin, Mercy's Mile, all debts reckoned. I laughed out loud because a man laughs when he feels seen by something he didn't invite. The laugh died when my dash lit up like a Christmas parade. ABS, check engine, battery, oil, every warning light a red eye. The rig didn't shudder. It simply stopped, like the road had slipped an arm around the frame and eased me to idle. I coasted onto a lane of asphalt so new the rain beaded like mercury. My needles fell to zero as soft as sleep. No trucks hissed past. No taillights smeared the wet. Just the sound of rain pattering on an absence you don't notice until someone clears their throat in an empty room. Ahead, a toll booth grew out of the dark. Not one of the concrete goblin houses from the turnpike, but a neat wooden kiosk with a little roof like a birdhouse and a brass bell that didn't ring. 3 girls stood inside, and I say girls because they had the faces of teenagers, but their eyes were 30 winters older, barefoot, hair braided with coins that clinked against their necks when they turned. Not spooky, not threatening. Just clerks at a counter where the merchandise is the kind that fits in a palm and weighs like a memory. Cashless, the smallest said, voice clear as wiper squeak. She held out a mason jar with no lid. Breathe your owing into this. I half expected a smell. Ozone, lilies, something movie sinful. There was nothing. Only rain and my heart in my ears. I'm tapped out, I told her, lifting my hands, palms lined with road salt and callus. Ain't got anything left to pay. Everyone has breath, the tallest said, not unkind. That's the last tender. My ex once told me I had a way of making stubborn sound like virtue. I didn't feel virtuous. I felt tired and stupid and old. I leaned toward the jar and exhaled. The glass frosted in a circle like I'd kissed a winter window. The girl set the jar on a little postal scale. The needle went past 0 to a red mark I didn't like the look of. She wrinkled her nose. Heavy, she said. Family mostly. And a few strays who weren't family until they needed to be. The others nodded as if an account had matched an invoice. Proceed, the tallest said, and the bell did ring then, once polite as a guest. The lane beyond the toll booth brightened, not with light, but with attention. You know when the world looks at you? It was that. I rolled forward, though nothing rolled, and I thought, this is the place where a man finds out whether his promises were jokes told to himself. The first thing the mile gave me was quiet. Not the peace of it, just the absence of competing sounds. No Jake brakes burping on the grade, no hiss of wet gravel under tire, not even the radio whisper, which I hadn't realized was comfort until it wasn't. What stayed was rain, and the bell's aftertaste in my teeth, a clean metal tang like you bit a coin on a dare. The blacktop widened into a corridor shouldered by crosses, not white memorials with plastic flowers like you see where folks kiss guardrails too hard, but dark cedar, char-streaked as if they'd been through a fire and decided to keep the scar. A ledger page was nailed to the arm of each cross in a weather sleeve. On more than a few, across the top margin, my name lay in block letters no one had asked me how to spell. The dates beneath weren't only losses. They were stupid Saturdays. A cashier I snapped at because the payment terminal lagged. A stray dog that looked like trouble, so I rolled my window up and told myself, not my lane. The time I took my brother to dialysis and sat in the parking lot scrolling my phone instead of going in to keep him company because he said, go on, I'll be fine. And I wanted to believe him. The smallest girl hopped up onto my running board like she owned the step. She tapped the glass and motioned me to lower it. 3 kinds of owing, she said. What you took, what you kept, and what you let happen. We can settle one cross tonight. Choose with both hands, not just the greedy one or the guilty one. That's some heavy philosophy for a kid, I said, because the wrong joke can be body armor. She shrugged, coins tinkling. Clerks, no inventory. A figure stood in the lane ahead. A man built like my brother, shoulders always trying to remember what it felt like not to hurt. He kept both hands in his jacket pocket the way my brother does when his fingers are cold from the machine. You made it weird when I talked about hospice, the figure said in my brother's soft as lint voice. You changed the station. I reached for the door handle. My hand met glass that didn't used to be there. The smallest girl's look was almost kind. Not yet, she said. Walkers and talkers come later. We're in the ledger phase. The crosses weren't random. The mile had arranged the worst first on my right where a man grabs. One said brother's bill. One said first wife. One said your father's silence, which hit me hard enough I couldn't swallow. A handful said nothing but had dates on them that matched no calendar I carry, like overdue notices from a life that split and kept running. Rules? I asked, because rules, even unfair ones, mean a way through. Only one cross tonight, the tallest girl said from the toll booth I couldn't see anymore and somehow still could. One clean close. If you try to yank more, it's like pulling a thread on a sweater you're wearing. What do I pay with? I said. You already took breath. Breath weighs the debt, the smallest said. Balance is in tender that matters. People try cash or cards. She made a small, regretful face. It's a polite gesture. I climbed down, boots meeting the mile like a baptism. The rain slicked my hair flat and cold. I approached the crosses and hated that my own name looked tidy above them. The Brothers' bill ledger had 3 lines: hospital, medication, dialysis. The total wasn't dollars. It was hours. The column read like 12, 72, 214. Hours I should have given, not money. The shame was so clean it almost felt good, the way scrubbing a wound does when you finally stop being delicate. The first wife ledger listed years. Year 4, promises deferred. Year 6, her mother's call you didn't return. Year 7, the day you didn't come home until your truck smelled like bars and someone else's perfume. I put my hand out to that cross on reflex, to choose it because I wanted the pain to point the way. But the smallest girl cleared her throat. Both hands, she reminded. Not just guilty. What's needed? The figure in the lane took his hands from his jacket pockets. He wasn't my brother, and he was. His fingers were swollen from needles and kindness. Pick mine if you need a push, he said, not pleading. Just a man stating a weather report. I don't want you to owe me anything, I said, which was rich, coming from a man with a jar full of breath. He huffed a laugh that made me miss him while he stood there. You're not listening. Pick mine so you don't owe yourself later. The mile trembled as if a truck had passed somewhere in the world where clocks behave. I set my palms on the Brothers' bill cross. The wood burned, but the pain didn't blister. It just made everything I'd let slide line up and look at me. Tender? The tallest prompted, gentle, because clerks love completion. I thumbed my pocket knife, the one my father gave me when I learned to grease my own bearings, scar in the handle where I'd set it on a manifold once. I folded it open and laid it on the ledger sleeve. Rain ticked its blade. Not enough, the smallest said, apologetic. This pays for kept debts. You're on let happen. I took the St. Christopher medal off my mirror, chain kinked with years of swinging through potholes. I laid that down. The jar on the toll booth scale fogged heavier. Halfway, the tallest said. One more. Something with time in it. I closed my eyes and found the thing I hoard like squirrels hoard nesting. Apology. Not cheap, not sorry if, not sorry but, the kind that takes longer than a song on the radio and leaves a man empty and willing. I'll go in, I said, meaning the dialysis center, the hard chairs, the joke-smelling disinfectant. Every time they'll let me, I'll sit the hours. I'll help him laugh through the part where his blood looks like a creek in spate. The jar's frost cleared a shade. Not a promise, the smallest warned, because promises are cheap. Proof. How do I began. You'll know, she said. And the bell that hadn't rung rang once more. The figure who wore my brother's posture nodded as if I'd finally parceled my stubborn out properly. The cross shivered. The ledger lines blurred until hours looked like rain running off a window. The wood cooled under my hands. The mile unrolled more blacktop ahead, patient as a book waiting to be finished. You still owe, the tallest said, but there was no scold in it, only inventory. Keep driving. So I did, past crosses that hummed like power lines in August, past ledgers that listed the exact shape of my selfishness in handwriting that looked like mine on a good day. The girls' coins chimed when they walked. The bell remembered, and the rain kept time. The mile's far end wasn't a ramp or a shoulder or a cul-de-sac. It was a narrowing of choices. The crosses thinned until only 3 stood like judges. First wife, your father's silence, and one with no title, only a date I hadn't lived yet. The toll booth felt both behind and ahead, the way a mirror feels when a room has 2. The smallest girl spoke first, as if reading minutes from a meeting. Ledger still shows weight. Brother's line softened, not closed. That's normal. Love keeps running tabs. We can close one more tonight if you've got the right tender. I put a hand on first wife, then on father's silence. Heat from the first was sharp, the particular sting of things you can list. Heat from the second was deep, cold-backed like creek water that steals your breath even in July. Dad didn't talk when Mom left. He didn't talk when I left either. He taught by absence, and I learned fluently. I could try to pay for that with phone calls now. Too late to his grave, too early to nobody. What balances silence? I asked, palm flat to the cedar. I can't return what he didn't give. You can return what you kept back because he did, the tallest said. Tender for generational debts is time spent out loud. That means what it sounds like, the smallest added. You sit at a table and say the ugly part first. I thought of my ex-wife's kitchen light that made everything honest and how I'd choose the couch or the shower or the yard to avoid the table. I thought of my brother's chair, vinyl split and taped, empty beside the machine when I drove on instead of turning in. I thought of my son, 2 states over, new stepdad teaching him to throw lefty because it's fun to be tricky. My chest felt like a rest stop stall where somebody carved scripture with a box cutter. Ugly, explicit, true. What about the future one? I asked, pointing to the cross with the date like a threat. Can a man pay ahead, put good down on what's coming? The smallest girl's face flickered between pity and professionalism. Prepayment is vanity 9 times out of 10. You'll think you paid and try to spend the change. The mile doesn't do change. Then it's her, I said, and set both hands on first wife. The wood heated under my palms, and I was back in a parking lot saying things that sounded factual and were only mean. I took the wedding ring I still carry in the console, don't ask why, and laid it on the ledger sleeve. Rain made the gold look cheap. That's for what you took, the tallest said. You still owe for what you let happen. What tender pays for that? I asked, voice thin. Time you give without being asked, the smallest answered. Choose a person and stand where the hard part hits. I pick my brother, I said, and the figure in the lane tilted his head like, finally. The bell rang, not a clerk's bell now, but a church bell. One long note that lived long enough to remind me why bells exist. To give sound to agreements nobody can see. The ledger ink bled, then dried darker. The cross's heat eased. The jar on the scale cleared until the circle my breath had made looked like a ghost ring left by a coffee mug on a dashboard. Balanced, the tallest said, not triumphant, only concluding. Not zero, balanced, learn the difference. What about the deer? I asked before the mile could decide I'd asked enough. You said I owe for them, the smallest lifted a shoulder. They'll come again. You'll know which ones are yours. Stop. Get wet. Be cold. Hold until they stand. Is there a receipt? I joked, because a man like me flinches at nakedness and reaches for humor like a towel. The smallest tapped the jar. There's this, she said. Keep it in your cab. If it fogs up again without you breathing in it, you'll know the balance tipped. Come find us or pay where you stand. How do I find you? I asked, already knowing. You don't, she said. We find you when you forget. The mile didn't end so much as shrug me off. The new asphalt turned to the old pocked ribbon with its familiar patched scabs. My dash lights came back normal. Warning cluster asleep. Truck purring like a dog forgiven for the trash. I checked the mirrors and saw only rain and the faint red blink of a marker 2 miles back like a heartbeat seen through skin. 2 mornings later, an envelope arrived at my brother's place stamped with the hospital's brace of logos. He opened it with the same care you open a snake's mouth. Adjusted to 0, he read, blinked and read again as if he'd been asked to sight-read harmony. Some assistance program through the clinic. Paperwork mistake in our favor. He looked at me, puzzled as weather. You do something? Yeah, I said, and went with the only true explanation. I turned in where I should have. I started going inside. All of it. The beeping, the clear bags hanging like jellyfish, the nurses who call you sugar because they need a word that means both affection and persistence. I held the joke magazines. I filled in the crosswords wrong. When my brother got bad news, I didn't change the station. I sat with him while it ran. When a fawn skated into the ditch on ice months later and splayed like a broken compass, I pulled over, set out triangles, slipped down the bank, and put my hands on a shaking life that smelled like wet copper pennies and leaf mold. You don't fix everything by standing. You fix the part where nobody stands. In the cab, the jar rides in the dash cubby. It's clear most days, innocent as a drinking glass. Once, on a raw March night south of Waithville, I glanced down and saw frost filming the inside like a cold tongue had licked it. I pulled off at the next exit and found a guy in a Toyota steaming on the shoulder, hood up, wife crying into a towel because the baby in the car seat had gone quiet. Too quiet. We waited for the ambulance with the hazard lights drumming like a heart. The jar cleared as sirens wrote their red across the rain. People ask long-haul types what keeps us out there when home could be closer. I used to say money. Then I said habit. Now I say miles. The kind you pay and the kind you balance. The kind that appear when you owe and disappear when you don't. If you see a sign for Mercy's Mile, don't laugh until your dash goes dead. Breathe into the jar when they hand it to you and pay with whatever makes your hands shake. And when the road spits you back onto the common lanes, don't hoard your mercy like fuel. Spend it before it goes bad. The mile will find you when you forget. Better to remember on your own. My name isn't the interesting part. What mattered on that hill was my set of keys, my golf cart with the dying battery, and the badge that said I was the one awake when everyone else paid to sleep. They built the resort over a sulfur spring the old folks called Devil's Tea Kettle, because it boils what it wants and keeps what it likes. Marketing scrubbed the name down to Everglen Mineral Spa, painted the bathhouse robin's egg blue, and taught the desk clerks to say healing energies without laughing. I watched cameras, jiggled doorknobs, told drunks to use indoor voices, and carried a maglite that felt like a promise I couldn't keep. The spring house was older than the rest. Brick cylinder, conical roof, a wooden door that swelled every rain. Inside, the spring rose in a stone basin as wide as a kiddie pool and twice as deep, a mouth cut into mountain where water kept a slow, deliberate breath. When it ran hot, the air tasted like struck matches and pennies. When it ran cold, it smelled like a cellar that remembered onions. My shift started at 10. By midnight, the yoga people were asleep, and the outdoor gas fire pits were hissing at raccoons. At 1:15, every alarm in the spa tripped at once. Doors, service hallway, pump room, and then cleared like hands lifted off piano keys. It wasn't wind. It wasn't a raccoon strong enough to know a keypad. I drove the cart up the serpentine path past hydrangeas and stone lanterns and the tasteful bronze plaque that said, Mineral Source. No entry after hours by county order. Mud slicked the flagstones. New, where there shouldn't have been foot traffic. Bare feet. Many, small and large. Each print had the middle toe painted white, as careful as French tips. I keyed the spring house door. My radio gave a burst of static and then went quiet like someone told it the secret and it promised to keep it. The maglight's beam bounced off wet brick. Candles the size of tea lights floated on cut laurel leaves around the basin, rowing themselves in a slow circle that never quite reached the drain. A man stood knee-deep in the water, linen suit soaked to the thighs, eyes closed, lips moving as if the water had leaned up to hear him better. He wasn't a guest. Guests wear resort robes like forgiveness. He wore a suit that said pallbearer or preacher, only he smelled like cloves and sulfur instead of cologne. "Sir, we're closed," I said, trying to put the authority into my words that the badge rarely gives by itself. "You can't be here. County ordinance." He opened his eyes. Milk white. No cataracts I've seen ever looked so chosen. "We're making the water remember," he said calmly, as if that explained my keys, his trespass, and the way the candles didn't melt. "Remember what?" "Who we loved, and how long we need them kept." He turned slightly. Behind the pillar that holds the plaque with the spring's temperature and parts per million, 4 more people stepped into view. Regular clothes, white middle toe. They held things in their hands. A room key card, a rosary, a lock of hair tied with sewing thread, a folded grocery list with trembling edges. Their faces had that tired joy you see at hospital nurseries and gravesides, an exhausted awe. Pools drained at night, I lied. There's nothing to keep. The man in linen smiled at me without cruelty. Some pools drain. Some places only appear empty when they're asleep. He cupped his hands. Water darkened his palms, and, I swear by every policy I ever signed, didn't fall between his fingers. A fifth person entered carrying a wooden box, a child's coffin, no more than a foot longer than my forearm. The wood was plain, varnish soft from hands. She cradled it like you cradle anything you don't dare put down. She wore a white shirt and rolled-up pants like the others, but her hair hung wet in ropes and her lips were blue, as if she'd been talking to the spring for hours and it had taken what it needed of her heat. "You can't," I said, moving without thinking, hand out for the box like the rightness of the world depended on that single act. The man in linen angled his body between us, not menacing, just inevitable. He wasn't protectively blocking the box from me. He was keeping me from getting between an agreement and its countersignature. The woman sank to her knees at the edge, whispered something into the seam where lid met side, and slid the coffin into the water. It didn't bob. It didn't even hesitate like wood always does when you force it to choose. It took the angle the spring offered and went down without bubbles, without complaint. My radio shrieked a thread of feedback, cut itself off, and left me the sound of the candles chewing air. In the little hiss of the flamelets, the water stole another inch of depth from the room. That's when I realized what the alarms meant. Not doors, not wind. The resort was checking itself like a sleeping animal twitching to adjust around a dream. I stepped closer to the basin because telling a thing no from a distance is how cowards get to feel brave. The water breathed on my shins. "You have to leave," I said, and the way my voice thinned told me I'd left the simple world behind me the second I put my key in the door. They didn't argue. That was the worst of it. If they'd jeered or preached, I could have filed them under kooks and called the sheriff. Instead, they went on working with the same efficiency I used on my rounds. Check the latch, check the window, note the smell. The woman with rope-wet hair stood with her palms out like she was drying them over the candles. The man in linen, someone called him Speaker under their breath, almost respectfully, opened a leather case from the bench and laid out implements. A little brass funnel, a stack of blank folded cards, a blue pencil, not props, tools. The others murmured names the way you read to babies. Careful, rhythmic, making sure the syllables land. "Who are you?" I asked because names make people manageable. "What is this?" He didn't look up from dipping the funnel into the water and pouring a thread of it into a card where the paper soaked the line with a darker stripe. "Neighbors. We live within the sound of the bell." He flicked his gaze toward the ceiling where the old pull handle hung like a mute thought. "You call it Devil's Tea Kettle. Your boss calls it an amenity. We call it a library with a hungry librarian. A what? Every spring remembers what passes through it. A little salt, a little iron, the way a child's hair smells when you carry him to bed. This one remembers better than most. But memory's a jealous thing." He nodded at the water. "Left on its own, it keeps what it shouldn't and sours the rest. We bargain." He tapped the stack of room keys the others had laid on the bench like offerings. "We give it nights it won't miss. You're stealing reservations." I tasted the word like it could cut him. "That's criminal. We're trimming." He dipped the funnel again. "A night no one will swear they had, a meal they still feel full from but can't name. That buys us time before the mountain takes back those we're not done talking to. My radios, booth and hip, should have had the front desk on channel 2. I toggled. Nothing. The booth screens would show me 21 camera feeds. They would show me the pool deck emptying and refilling, the lobby clock pausing and lurching, then hotel software vomiting guest names in a slow dimming scroll. I knew this the way you know where a familiar step is without watching. You can feel a building breathe when you live inside its schedule. The group circled the basin. Each wore that single white dot of polish on the middle toe, neat as a signature. Their humming began soft. No church tune I knew, no Amazing Grace or Wayfaring Stranger, just a held note with the barest pivot of another note inside it, like a coin turned under a thumb. The water rose. Springs erupt. They don't swell upward like a pan filling from a bottom spigot. Yet the surface lifted without losing clarity. The candles rode higher, each leaf raft holding its bearing as if it answered to some geometry I hadn't been introduced to. The woman who'd brought the coffin knelt again. The speaker tilted his head and his tone gentled. "Ask," he told her. "Please," she said to the drain, the sound of it a breath she wasn't sure she deserved to use. "Keep him until the thaw. Keep him until his sister comes home. Keep him until my mother stops asking the Lord why at breakfast." The water answered. A small hand surfaced near the drain. Pale. Palm up, the middle finger wrapped with red thread. It wasn't grotesque. It was the bare fact of a child's hand made into proposal. I took a step across time that didn't belong to me, and the speaker's palm came up casual as a raised yield sign. His courtesy felt worse than being shoved. "You're sick," I said. The word coming out flat and armed with all the faith I had in facts like gravity and ordinance numbers. "We're grieving," he corrected, with an honesty that drew the air thin. "And we're paying." He took a key card, room 308, the font polite, and laid it across the hand. The card sank into the skin without wrinkle, like it belonged there. My tongue tasted metal so strong I could have sworn I was holding a penny on it. The hand withdrew. Water smoothed itself as if it had decided. The woman stood, every line in her face older and newer. The booth screens. Flickered in my mind's eye. 308s. Folio toggling from 2 nights comped, system error to no. Record, the concierge notes graying like ash. Somewhere, a couple would wake and tell each other in the morning that they dreamed of a river and, feeling light and foolish, they'd post a picture of their empty dessert plates with the caption, "Did we already eat?" They'd get in their car, drive home, and never remember they meant to stay a third night. I forced my radio into my throat. "Front desk," I said aimlessly, as if tone could patch signal. "We have unauthorized entry at the spring source." Static, and then, faintly, a printer's burr, the coma-quiet sound of software doing math. Nobody asked of it. In the spring house, the humming deepened long enough to touch the part of my chest that anxiety chews, the place that makes your breathing feel borrowed. "What does the water get if we take our dead back?" I asked because fear had realized anger was late and dressed itself in questions. "It keeps them sweet," he said simply. "Not forever. Nothing honest is forever. We buy season by season." He gestured toward the woman with the coffinless hands. "Until thaw. Until sister. Until mother's why wears down to a how. Then we carry who we love into dirt that won't spit him out." "And if I shut the pumps," I said, reaching for the only lever I knew, "or drain the basin?" "You'd drown instead of pour," he said, which made no sense until he added, "Some balances like to be paid in a particular style." The candles all tipped their little heads toward me for a heartbeat and then straightened, as if acknowledging a speaker at a meeting who wasn't on the agenda. That decided me. The rising water slipped an inch over the stone lip and went searching across the floor for my boots. "Out," I said, quieter. "All of you. Now." I put the mag light in my left hand and my keys in my right and stepped down into the basin up to my ankles, cold, shooting boneward so fast it felt hot. The spring's attention turned. It's the only way I can say it. The humming found a harmony that had my name in it. I thought of security procedures. Do not engage. Call law enforcement. I thought of the old men who'd warned me not to drink from Devil's tea kettle on dares, because it remembers you and might consider you a deposit. I thought of the coffins below the drain, because I believed in them already and hated that I did. The water lifted against my shins. Not strong, but insistent, like a child pushing you from behind, getting you to move without admitting that's what it's doing. I planted my boots and let the cold hurt. I've read manuals on conflict de-escalation. None include what to do when a spring asks you to pick a side. I stepped deeper because backing out then would have glued that cowardice to me for the rest of my life. The basin's stone lip bit under my soles and the water took my knees. The candles wobbled as my wake broke their lazy orbit. Along the wall, the congregation's humming tightened into a pulse. The speaker didn't move to block me. He angled his body so I wouldn't knock him into the drain and said, almost conversational, "You can't pull anything up that isn't paid for. That's not how this keeps." "I'm not here to take," I said, and realized I meant it. "I'm here to stop the bill from finding people who didn't sign it." The maglight's beam made a tunnel in the water. Through it I saw, beyond physics, beneath stone, shelves. Not imagination, not bubbles teasing shapes. Shelves cut into the bedrock, green-black with age, lined with narrow wooden boxes. Neat, respectful. A library's worth. On the topmost shelf, one space sat empty, the absence as precise as a cubby waiting for a child's lunchbox. I could have screamed then. Instead, I felt a silence shape itself around my tongue like a glove. "You stack them," I whispered. "We store what would spoil," the speaker said. "Have you buried a child?" The ground pushes back. The ground knows fresh. We cool grief until the season softens it enough to plant. I reached for the empty space. My fingers met a slant of cold that felt like a thought. Not yet. The water pulled, gentle, like a nurse with a blood pressure cuff asking you to unclench. Behind me, the woman's breath hitched in a sob she'd held back since the door. The congregation's humming leaned to a minor key, and I realized they were making a path for me, or for the coffin that wasn't there, or for the promise I hadn't made. "I don't know." "Let him go," I said to the blank, stupid water. "You can keep the room nights. Keep the tasting menu no one will miss. But let him go home before the thaw." The spring answered not with words, but with weight. It laid another inch across my thighs. My keys banged my belt. I pictured the pump room, the intake valves, the breaker that fed the spa's circulation. You can scare a building, just like you can scare a person. You shut it too fast and it remembers. I took the ring of keys off my belt and dropped them in. They spun, silver fish, and sank. The water, which had learned me by then, accepted the trade with an approving shiver. It wasn't enough. The ring was just a gesture. I reached up, tore the resort's staff ID lanyard over my head, and held the badge out like a tithe. "Take my access," I said. "Take my right to this door. Take my sign-in. Take my face from the monitor that opens automatic. If you need nights, take every one of mine here." The speaker's head tilted, not triumphant. Considering. "Tender accepted," he said. "1 season." "2," the woman blurted, desperate, making a bargain brave. The spring tugged at my legs in a patient no. "1," the speaker repeated, not unkind. "Don't be greedy with borrowed cold." He put a hand on my shoulder, not a preacher's benediction, not a cop's warning, nothing theatrical. A neighbor's hand. Together we watched the empty slot fill, water knitting around to shape the way ice finds its edge. The space was a space again. The woman cried the way stone sheds water after a storm. Sudden, clean, and then nothing left to give. Behind us, my radio coughed a shard of front desk. And weird. 308 show zeroed. Maintenance, are you... I didn't answer. The spring sighed and let me go, in the same way some towns hold a long-time fool until he learns the stoplight's rhythm. I backed out. The water fell with me, grudging but not vengeful, like I'd paid the exact coin it asked for. The congregation filed out without touching me, toes lifting carefully to keep their white dots clean. They left the door wide so the sulfur could follow us and make the hallway confess. The speaker lingered to collect his cards and tools. He fished my keyring from the water with a motion like plucking a lily and set it on the bench. Not a mercy. A receipt. "You'll quit," he said, not a question. "I'll finish the week," I lied, because the human throat hates to say the thing out loud before the mind catches up. "Before thaw," he said, and gave me a small tired smile a man gives another man he won't see again until a funeral. Morning made it ordinary. The CFO called it a database hiccup. Guests checked out delighted, fussed at their luggage, tipped housekeeping, complained about a squeaky elevator that doesn't exist. No one asked why they had the taste of lake water in their mouth when they reached for the lobby mints. The GM asked if I'd been propping doors at night because humidity had spiked atypically. I turned in the badge on Friday, shaking only after I crossed the employee lot and the spring house fell behind a pocket of trees. Before I left, I unlocked the door one last time and pointed the mag light down the drain. Something looked back, not eyes. An oval, a face smoothed by water's hand, hair lifted and laid by the slow current like grass pressed under snow. Behind it, the shelves waited, tidy as hymnals. I didn't say anything. I didn't pray. I stood long enough to make a choice and then made it. I walked away without turning twice and didn't drink from a glass that could show me my reflection for months. Now I live a county inland where the water runs shallow and brown and honest, where the hotels are ugly on purpose. I still wake thirsty and won't drink from anything I can see myself in. When my sink gurgles, I listen for the humming and tell myself it's only air in pipes. I keep a hotel key in my desk drawer, 308 rubbed flat from handling, the mag striped dead. Some nights I take it out and hold it to my tongue. It tastes like pennies and apologies. If you visit a spa with a perfect little brick spring house and a plaque that says county order after hours, don't test it. If you see middle toes painted white, lower your eyes and mind your own balance. And if anyone lowers a small wooden box into a place that drinks without bubbles, understand. You've stepped into a ledger that tallies in nights and names, not dollars. Pay nothing you can't live without. Offer nothing the water can keep. And for God's sake, don't look directly into a drain that knows you're there unless you're ready to see your seasons stacked like books on a shelf, waiting their turn to be checked out.